On the night of February 9th, 1943, Lieutenant Commander Peter Gretton stood on the bridge of HMS Starling, his breath forming white clouds in the freezing Atlantic air. As he watched the darkness swallow the convoy ahead, the wind howled across the black waters, carrying with it the salt spray that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Below the surface, somewhere in that vast underwater wilderness, German U-boats prowled like wolves, waiting for the precise moment when British merchant ships would be most vulnerable. What these submarine commanders did not know was that the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed, and the technology mounted on Gretton's escort vessel would soon reveal their every move. The Battle of the Atlantic had reached its most desperate phase. German Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz had deployed his wolf packs with unprecedented aggression, coordinating groups of 7 to 20 submarines to overwhelm convoy defenses through sheer numbers. Each month, hundreds of thousands of tons of Allied shipping disappeared beneath the waves, taking with them vital supplies of food, fuel, ammunition, and the very materials needed to sustain Britain's war effort. The U-boat commanders had refined their tactics to a deadly science. Approach on the surface at night when visibility made visual detection nearly impossible. Then dive only for the attack itself. Their gray-painted hulls became invisible against the dark water, and their low profiles made them nearly undetectable by the primitive radar systems most British warships carried. Commanders like Captain Lieutenant Siegfried von Forstner and Corvettenkapitän Erich Tapp had become legends among the Kriegsmarine, their success measured in thousands of tons of Allied shipping sent to the ocean floor. But technology was shifting the balance in ways the U-boat crews could not yet comprehend. The Type 71 radar, developed in utmost secrecy by British scientists working around the clock at research facilities throughout England, operated on a 10-centimeter wavelength that provided resolution unprecedented in naval warfare. According to documents later declassified by the British Admiralty and referenced in historical analyses published by the Naval Historical Branch, this centimetric radar could detect a submarine's periscope at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, even in complete darkness and rough seas. The system's rotating antenna, housed in a distinctive lantern-like structure atop the ship's mast, swept the surrounding waters with invisible beams of electromagnetic energy, painting a picture of the battlefield that no human eye could match. Lieutenant Commander Gretton had been among the first escort commanders to receive comprehensive training on the Type 71 system. He understood its capabilities and its limitations. The radar operator, Petty Officer Thomas Aldridge, sat hunched over the glowing cathode ray tube in the darkened operations room below deck, his eyes trained on the circular display where phosphorescent blips appeared and disappeared like fireflies. Each sweep of the antenna created a fresh image, and Aldridge had learned to distinguish between wave returns, debris, and the unmistakable signature of a submarine's conning tower or periscope cutting through the surface. Tonight, as convoy homebound 14 steamed eastward toward Liverpool carrying desperately needed supplies from North America, both men knew that German submarines would be searching for them. Guided by intelligence reports and the predictable mathematics of convoy routing, the development of the Type 71 radar represented one of the most significant technological breakthroughs of the entire war, though few outside the highest levels of British naval command understood its true importance. Throughout 1941 and 1942, British scientists working at the Telecommunications Research Establishment had wrestled with the fundamental challenge of creating a radar system compact enough to fit aboard escort vessels yet powerful enough to detect the smallest targets at operationally useful ranges. The key lay in the cavity magnetron, a revolutionary device that generated high-frequency radio waves with unprecedented efficiency. This British invention, shared with American allies in an exchange that would prove crucial to Allied victory, enabled radar systems to operate at shorter wavelengths where resolution improved dramatically. Captain Lieutenant Hans Joachim Hess commanded U-27, one of the Type 7C submarines that formed the backbone of Germany's Atlantic Fleet. On this same February night, he surfaced his vessel 30 miles west of Gretton's position, unaware that his actions were about to be rendered obsolete by technology he could not see or detect. The Type 7C required surface running to recharge its massive lead-acid batteries, which powered the electric motors used for submerged operations. Diesel engines, efficient and powerful, but requiring atmospheric oxygen, drove the submarine at speeds exceeding 17 knots on the surface while simultaneously spinning generators that restored electrical capacity to the battery banks. This fundamental limitation of submarine technology forced commanders like Hess to spend Significant time exposed on the surface, traditionally under cover of darkness when visual detection became nearly impossible. The bridge watch aboard U-427 consisted of 4 men: Hess himself, his executive officer Oberleutnant Sir Friedrich Mumm, and the lookouts whose eyes constantly scanned the horizon for any sign of escort vessels or aircraft. They wore heavy leather coats against the cold, and their binoculars swept the darkness in overlapping arcs, searching for the silhouette of a warship or the telltale white water of a ship's wake. German submarine dock, trying to emphasize vigilance during surface operations. And U-boat commanders knew that an alert lookout represented their best defense against surprise attack. What they did not know, because German intelligence had failed to grasp its significance, was that British centimetric radar had made visual detection obsolete. Aboard HMS Starling, Petty Officer Aldrich suddenly leaned forward, his attention focused on a contact that had appeared on his radar display at a bearing of 270 degrees, range 8,000 yards. The return was small but distinct, stronger than wave clutter, but moving across the screen with the characteristic pattern of a vessel under power. He immediately reported to Lieutenant Commander Gretton through the voice pipe that connected the operations room to the bridge. Gretton acknowledged the report calmly, his mind already processing tactical options. 8,000 yards provided sufficient distance to maneuver for attack without alerting the submarine to their presence. He ordered a course change that would bring Starling onto an intercept heading while maintaining adequate separation to avoid visual detection. From the U-boat's bridge watch, German submarine commanders had grown confident, perhaps overconfident, in their ability to operate with impunity during night surface operations. Monthly sinking reports, compiled by Admiral Dennitz's staff at U-boat headquarters in occupied France, and later analyzed by military historians, showed that Wolfpack tactics had achieved devastating success throughout 1942. The Allies had lost over 6 million tons of shipping that year alone, a rate of destruct that threatened to sever Britain's maritime lifeline before American industrial production could compensate for the losses. But February 1943 marked a turning point, though few recognized it at the time. The German Naval Command had designated this operational area as Grid Square Bravo Echo 73, part of the systematic subdivision of the Atlantic Ocean that allowed U-boat headquarters to coordinate submarine movements with precision. Captain Lieutenant Hess represented just one element of a larger force that Dennitz had assembled, specifically to intercept convoy Homebound 14. Intelligence gathered from radio direction finding, analysis of Allied signal traffic, and reports from low-range Focke-Wulf Condor reconnaissance aircraft had provided U-boat command with enough information to predict the convoy's approximate position and course. 3 additional submarines U-21 under Korvettenkapitän Hanstroger, U-638, commanded by Oberleutnant Sir Oscar Staudinger, and U-757 under Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Dietz were converging on the same coordinates, following the tactical doctrine that had proven so effective throughout the previous year. Radio discipline remained critical to Wolfpack operations. U-boat commanders transmitted brief coded messages using high-speed burst transmissions that minimized the time their radio emissions could be detected and triangulated by Allied direction finding stations scattered across Britain, Icy, Eland, and North America. These messages, rarely longer than a few dozen characters, reported contact positions, convoy composition, and attack results. Dennitz's staff plotted each report on enormous maps in the concrete bunker that served as U-boat headquarters, updating the tactical picture hourly and transmitting orders that coordinated the actions of submarines separated by hundreds of miles of ocean. The system represented naval warfare at its most sophisticated, leveraging modern communications technology to achieve tactical concentration without requiring the submarines to maintain visual contact with each other. But communications worked both ways, and British intelligence had achieved breakthroughs of its own. The Government Code and Cipher School at Bletchley Park, where thousands of analysts worked in complete secrecy to break German military codes, had made significant progress against the Kriegsmarine's Enigma cipher system, while the naval Enigma remained more difficult to break than its Luftwaffe equivalent. The intelligence professionals at Bletchley achieved sufficient success to provide convoy routing officers with advance warning of U-boat patrol positions. This intelligence, codenamed Ultra and protected by the most stringent security measures, allowed the Admiralty to route some convoys around known submarine concentrations. However, the geometry of the Atlantic and the number of U-boats at sea made evasion impossible in many cases. and convoy homebound 14 had sailed directly into an area where German submarines waited in AM. Bush, Lieutenant Commander Gretton, had received an ultra warning through classified channels. Before HMS Starling departed Liverpool to join the convoy's escort group, the message, stripped of any information that might reveal its source to avoid compromising British code-breaking success, indicated that enemy submarine activity was expected in grid references corresponding to the convoy's planned route. This intelligence shaped Gretton's tactical planning, reinforcing his determination to use the Type 71 radar aggressively rather than conservatively. He understood that the war's outcome might depend on the effectiveness with which escort commanders exploited their technological advantages before German countermeasures evolved to neutralize them. Aboard U-27, Captain Lieutenant Hess had no inkling that electronic eyes were tracking his submarine. Across 8,000 yards of empty ocean, the diesel engines rumbled steadily, pushing the submarine through moderate swells at 15 knots while generators hummed below deck, converting mechanical energy into the electrical charge that would enable tomorrow's submerged operations. HMS Starling cut through the Atlantic swells with PR, Actus efficiency, her destroyer hull designed for exactly this kind of pursuit. Lieutenant Commander Gretton had reduced speed to minimize the bow wave and wake that might betray his approach to alert lookouts aboard the U-boat. The range had decreased to 5,000 yards, then 4,000, as the escort vessel closed on an intercept course carefully calculated to bring her within weapon range before the submarine could detect the threat and crash dive to safety. Petty Officer Aldrich continued reporting bearing and range upgrades every 30 seconds, his voice steady despite the tension that filled the operations room. The radar contact remained strong and consistent, exactly matching the behavior expected from a submarine running on the surface. To recharge batteries, the Type 71 radar's 10-centimeter wavelength provided detail. That seemed almost miraculous to operators trained on earlier systems. The older metric wavelength radars, operating around 1.5 meters, could detect large ships at substantial ranges, but struggled with small targets and suffered from poor resolution that made precise bearing determination difficult. The centimetric radar painted such a clear picture that experienced operators like Aldridge could distinguish between different types of vessels, based solely on the characteristics of the radar return. A submarine's conning tower produced a distinctive echo, harder and more compact than the diffuse returns from wave crests or debris. Historical accounts from Royal Navy anti-submarine operations, documented in post-war analyses by naval historians and official admiralty records, confirm that the Type 71 system's performance exceeded even optimistic pre-deployment predictions. At 3,000 yards, Gretton ordered his crew to action stations. Throughout HMS Starling, sailors moved swiftly to their battle positions with the practiced efficiency that came from months of convoy escort duty. The forward gun crew cleared for action, though Gretton had no intention of using the main armament until absolutely necessary gunfire would alert every submarine with dozens of miles that an escort vessel had made contact. Instead, he focused on Bree, inking Starling into position for a depth charge attack. The ship carried over 100 of these cylindrical weapons, each packed with 300 pounds of Torpex explosive and equipped with hydrostatic pistols that could be set to detonate at specific depths. The newer charges could be set as deep as 700 feet, far beyond the crush depth of any operational U-boat. Captain Lieutenant Hess checked his watch and considered diving to periscope depth. U-27 had been surfaced for nearly 3 hours, sufficient time to bring the batteries to 70% charge. German submarine doctrine recommended diving before dawn to avoid the vulnerability that came with daylight surface operations, but dawn remained hours away, and Hess W. aiming to maximize battery capacity before beginning another day of submerged hunting. His lookouts had reported nothing unusual, just the empty darkness of the Atlantic on an overcast night with no moon. The executive officer, Oberleutnant Mum, stood beside him on the bridge, equally confident that they remained undetected. Both men would have been horrified to know that a British destroyer was closing to within 2,000 yards. Guided by radar emissions, their submarine could neither detect nor jam. The technology gap had emerged from different national priorities and scientific approaches. German scientists had developed excellent torpedo technology, sophisticated submarine hull designs, and effective diesel engines, but they had lagged in radar development, particularly at centimetric wavelengths. The cavity magnetron that made British centimetric radar possible represented a fundamental breakthrough in microwave generation that German researchers did not achieve during the war years. Some historians have argued, based on captured German documents and post-war interrogations of Kriegsmarine technical staff, that German naval intelligence consistently underestimated British radar capabilities, dismissing reports from U-boat commanders who suspected they were being detected by means other than visual observation. At 1,500 yards, Lieutenant Commander Gretton ordered flank speed, and HMS Starling's engines responded with a surge of power that pushed the destroyer to 32 knots. The sudden acceleration created a substantial bow wave, luminescent with disturbed plankton, that would be visible to the U-boat's lookouts if they happened to be scanning in the right direction. But Gretton was gambling that surprise would be complete, that the German crew would have no warning until Starling appeared out of the darkness like an avenging ghost. The radar contact remained steady on the scope, the submarine apparently oblivious to the threat bearing down on her position. Aldrich's voice rose slightly with excitement as he called out the decreasing range. 1,000 yards, 900 yards, 800 yards. On the bridge of U-27, the starboard lookout suddenly shouted a warning that sent ice through every German submariner's veins. Destroyer, bearing green for 5, close range. Captain Lieutenant Hess spun to look in the indicated direction and felt his stomach drop as he saw the dark mass of an escort vessel less than 800 yards away, closing at high speed with a massive bone of white water at her bow. There was no time for question. No time to wonder how the British ship had approached undetected. Training and survival instinct took over. Hess hit the dive alarm, and throughout U-27 the klaxon sounded, sending the crew scrambling to diving stations. The lookouts practically fell through the conning tower hatch in their haste to get below. Hess and Mum followed, pulling the hatch closed behind them as water already washed across the forward deck. But submarine diving procedures took time. Precious seconds that HMS Starling's rushing approach measured in yards of closed distance. The ballast tank vents snapped open with explosive bursts of compressed air, and seawater flooded into the submarine's ballast tanks, increasing her weight and dragging her beneath the surface. The bow dipped sharply as forward momentum and negative buoyancy combined to drive U-27 underwater. But she had started from a surface trim that required time to overcome. Gretton could see the submarine's profile clearly now, darker than the surrounding water, and he watched her forward deck submerge as the conning tower fought to follow. He ordered fire depth charges. When HMS Starling crossed the swirl marking where the submarine had submerged, and the depth charge crews responded instantly. The first pattern consisted of 10 charges, 5 dropped from stern rails and 5 thrown by side-launching throwers, to create a roughly circular pattern. Centered on the submarine's estimated position, each charge was set for different depth, from 50 feet to 200 feet, to maximize the probability that at least one would detonate close enough to the submarine to cause catastrophic damage. The charges tumbled through the water, their cylindrical shape spinning slowly as they descended, while Gretton ordered a hard turn to port to clear the explosion zone. U-27 was passing 70 feet depth, driving downward at maximum angle, when the first charge detonated 100 yards astern and 40 feet above her current position. The explosion created a bubble of superheated gas that expanded faster than sound through water, generating a pressure wave that struck the submarine's hull with hammer force. Inside U-27, the crew experienced the attack as a series of stunning shocks that threw men from their feet, and shattered light bulbs throughout the boat. Glass from broken gauges scattered across deck plates. Cork insulation fell from the overhead in chunks, and streams of water appeared at dozens of hole penetrations, where the pressure wave had stressed seals beyond their design limits. Hess struggled to maintain control as damage reports flooded in from all compartments. The hydroplane controls had jammed, making depth control difficult. Several battery cells had cracked, releasing chlorine gas that required emergency ventilation procedures. Most critically, the stern diving planes had been damaged and were stuck at a downward angle, driving the submarine deeper than Hess wanted to go. U-27 passed 200 feet, with her depth gauge spinning clockwise, the crew fighting to regain control before she exceeded her maximum operating depth. Lieutenant Commander Gretton listened intently to the reports from his sonar operator, trying to construct a mental picture of the submarine's movements and conditioned from the acoustic signatures that penetrated the ocean depths. British escort vessels were equipped with ASDIC, the acoustic detection system that transmitted pulses of sound through the water and listened for echoes returning from submerged objects. The system's range and accuracy had improved significantly since the war's beginning, though it still suffered from limitations imposed by water temperature layers, ambient noise, and the submarine's ability to maneuver unpredictably to break contact. The sonar operator reported a solid contact bearing 180 degrees, range for 100 yards, depth estimated at 250 feet and increasing. The submarine was diving deeper, probably damaged but still under control. Captain Lieutenant Hess had managed to regain some control over U-27, though the situation remained desperate. The engineering officer reported that water was entering faster than the bilge pumps could handle, and the chlorine gas from the cracked battery cells was reaching dangerous concentrations despite emergency ventilation efforts. Most submarine crews carried gas masks for exactly this contingency, and Hess ordered them distributed throughout the boat. The crew worked with grim determination, knowing their lives depended on stopping the flooding and getting the submarine back under proper control. The stern planes remained jammed, forcing the crew to use forward motion and careful manipulation of the forward hydroplanes. To control depth, they had reached 300 feet before arresting the descent, dangerously close to the Type 7C's official maximum operating depth of 330 feet. HMS Starling's crew prepared a second depth charge pattern, while Gretton maneuvered to maintain sonar contact with the submerged submarine. The cat-and-mouse game required patience and careful judgment. Drop charges too early and waste weapons while allowing the submarine to escape, wait too long, and risk losing contact entirely. Historical analyses of anti-submarine warfare tactics compiled by naval historians examining Admiralty records and personal accounts from convoy escort operations emphasize that successful attacks require this combination of persistence and good timing. A single depth charge pattern, even a close one, rarely destroyed a submarine outright. The pressure wave might crack the hull, damage machinery, or kill crew members. But Type 7 submarines were remarkably sturdy vessels capable of absorbing tremendous punishment. Aboard U-27, Hess ordered silent running, reducing all non-essential machinery to minimize the acoustic signature that British Aztec could detect. The crew moved carefully to avoid creating noise, and those not actively engaged in damage control remained at their stations, breathing slowly to conserve oxygen. The submarine's battery-powered electric motors, which provided propulsion while submerged, were capable of operating almost silently at low speeds. Hess ordered 3 knots, barely enough to maintain steerage, and changed course to starboard, hoping to creep away from the area where Starling's crew expected to find him. Every man understood that their survival depended on evading detection long enough to surface after the destroyer gave up the search or was called away to other duties. But the Type 71 radar had fundamentally changed the equation of submarine warfare in ways that went beyond simple detection of surface vessels. The system's exceptional sensitivity meant that even a submarine snorkel mast, the breathing tube developed late in the war to allow battery charging while remaining submerged, could be detected at operationally significant ranges. Although snorkels were not yet standard equipment on Atlantic U-boats in February 1943, the radar's capabilities foreshadowed the technological obsolescence of the submarine as it then existed. Any attempt to charge batteries would expose U-27 to immediate detection and attack. Hess could remain submerged on battery power alone for perhaps 24 hours if he minimized speed and electrical consumption, but eventually he would have to surface or surrender. The radio man aboard U-27 hesitated before approaching Captain Lieutenant Hess with his request. Breaking radio silence while being hunted by an escort vessel violated basic submarine doctrine. Radio transmissions could be detected and triangulated by Allied direction-finding stations, potentially drawing more hunters to their position, but Hess made the decision quickly. The other submarines of the Wolf Pack needed to know that British escorts possessed capabilities beyond anything they had previously encountered. He dictated a brief message: attack by destroyer at night, detected without visual contact. Type 71 radar suspected, AM evading, position Bravo Echo 734. The radio man encrypted the message using his Enigma machine and transmitted it in a burst lasting less than 3 seconds, the antenna mast breaking the surface briefly before retracting. The transmission reached U-boat headquarters in France within minutes, where watch officers plotted the position on their master chart and immediately transmitted a warning to all submarines operating in the North Atlantic. Gross Admiral Dennett read the report with concern that bordered on alarm. Intelligence reports about British centimetric radar had been accumulating for months, but many in the Kriegsmarine had dismissed them as exaggerated or misunderstood. If British escorts could now detect submarines reliably at night during surface operations, The entire basis of Wolfpack tactics would need fundamental revision. Dennis drafted orders, directing U-boat commanders to exercise extreme caution during surface operations and to assume that British escorts possessed radar capabilities superior to previous estimates. Corvetteman Hans Stroger aboard U-21 received the warning, while positioned 40 miles northeast of U-27's last known location. He had been approaching the convoy's estimated position at high speed on the surface, confident in the cover of darkness, but Hess's message changed his calculations. Stroger ordered an immediate dive to periscope depth, sacrificing speed for safety. Other submarine commanders in the area made similar decisions, and the carefully coordinated Wolfpack attack that Dennis had orchestrated began to fragment as individual captains prioritized survival over aggressive prosecution of the convoy. This subtle change in tactical behavior, multiplied across dozens of submarines and hundreds of encounters, would contribute to a dramatic shift in the Battle of the Atlantic's momentum during the coming months. Lieutenant Commander Gretton maintained contact with U-27 for another 2 hours, dropping 3 more depth charge patterns that kept the submarine deep and prevented her from escaping. The persistent prosecution exhausted U-27's battery capacity faster than Hess had anticipated, and the chlorine gas concentration in the forward compartment reached levels that made the space uninhabitable despite gas masks. At 0300 hours on February 10th, with his batteries nearly depleted, flooding impossible to control, without surfacing to use diesel-powered pumps, and several crew members unconscious from chlorine exposure, Hess made the hardest decision a submarine commander could make. He ordered all stop, allowed the submarine to settle to the bottom at 410 feet well beyond her rated depth, but survivable with care, and prepared to surface at dawn to surrender. HMS Starling's sonar operator reported that the submarine contact had disappeared from his scope, either having somehow escaped despite continuous tracking or having settled on the bottom. Gretton made several more passes over the area, dropping single depth charges to discourage any attempt to remain submerged, before reluctantly breaking off the engagement to rejoin the convoy. His fuel state was becoming critical after hours of high-speed maneuvering, and his primary responsibility remained protecting the merchant vessels that carried Britain's lifeline. U-27 surfaced at 0615 hours on February 10, 1943, wallowing in moderate seas under an overcast sky that provided no hope of concealment. Captain Lieutenant Hess emerged through the conning tower hatch to find HMS Starling and to other escorts converging on his position. Having detected his surfacing immediately through their Type 71 radar systems, he ordered the white flag hoisted and prepared to abandon ship. The crew filed onto the deck in an orderly fashion despite their ordeal, wearing life jackets and waiting for the British to send boats to collect them. Hess watched his submarine settle lower in the water as the sea flooded through hatches deliberately left open, and felt a complex mixture of relief that his crew would survive and profound sadness at losing his command. 47 men went into Allied captivity that morning. 3 had died during the depth charge attacks, their bodies remaining in the submarine as she made her final dive to the ocean floor. The engagement between HMS Starling and U-27 represented a single tactical encounter in a campaign that would continue for another 2 years, but it exemplified the technological and tactical shifts that would determine the Battle of the Atlantic's outcome. Records compiled by British naval historians and maintained by the Admiralty Historical Branch, now part of the United Kingdom's National Archives, document how the introduction of centimetric radar fundamentally altered submarine warfare dynamics between late 1942 and mid-1943. The period from January through May 1943 became known as the crisis of the U-boat war, when German submarine losses suddenly escalated from roughly 10 boats per month to over 40 per month in May alone. Multiple factors contributed to this dramatic reversal beyond radar technology. The number of escort vessels available to the Royal Navy increased substantially as new construction completed and American shipyards began delivering destroyer escorts in large numbers. Allied air cover improved with the introduction of very long-range Liberator bombers equipped with centimetric radar that could patrol areas of the Atlantic previously beyond aircraft range. The closure of the air gap in mid-Atlantic meant submarines could no longer surface safe, lie even far from convoy routes, improved anti-submarine weapons, including homing torpedoes and advanced depth charges, made successful attacks more likely when contact was achieved. Most importantly, the accumulation of operational experience created an increasingly professional and capable force of escort commanders who understood how to leverage their technological advantages against determined but outmatched opponents. Gross Admiral Dennett withdrew his U-boats from the North Atlantic convoy routes. In May 1943, after losses exceeded replacement capacity, for the first time in the war, those submarine operations would continue until Germany's final surrender. The Kriegsmarine never again achieved the dominance it had enjoyed during the happy time of 1940 and the successful Wolfpack operations of 1942. British and American merchant peak construction outpaced losses by increasingly wide margins, ensuring that the maritime bridge between North America and Europe remained intact. Despite continued German efforts to sever it, the strategic question of whether Britain could sustain itself as a base for offensive operations against Nazi-occupied Europe, which had seemed genuinely uncertain throughout 1942, was effectively answered in the Allies' favor by developments like the night encounter between Lieutenant Commander Gretton and Captain-Lieutenant Hess. The human dimensions of this technological transformation deserve recognition. Alongside the hardware specifications and tactical doctrines, Peter Gretton survived the war and eventually reached the rank of admiral, his expertise in anti-submarine warfare making substantial contributions to NATO naval doctrine. During the Cold War, Hans-Joachim Hess spent the remainder of He war in a Canadian prisoner of war camp, returning to Germany in 1947 to find a country physically and psychologically devastated by total defeat. Many of his crew members, young men in their early 20s when they went to war, struggled to rebuild lives in the ruins of the Third Reich. The technological competition that determined their fates continued throughout the 20th century. Submarine and anti-submarine capabilities evolving in an endless cycle of measure and countermeasure that persists to this day. But on that February night in the North Atlantic, when radar first demonstrated its power to penetrate the darkness that had protected submarines since their invention, the nature of naval warfare changed permanently, and the strategic balance of the Second World War shifted decisively toward Allied victory.